Today in the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Brian Batko. The first week of OTAs for the Steelers are wrapped up. We want to take apart what things we saw, who we talked to. We're going to lead on the linebacker group, which could this be the best Steelers linebacker group in several years? We'll talk about that and a lot more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Brian Batko, let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can get all of our written work at post-gazette.com. You can find us here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube by searching Post-Gazette Sports. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as all of the daily content that comes out from all of our Post-Gazette sports writers. And as always, our show is sponsored by the best bar in all of Pittsburgh, and that's Mike's Beer Bar. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today for 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. More on them later. Brian, it's the first week of OTAs. It's just football in shorts, but there was a lot of new stuff to go around for certain. We talked a lot about the new on offense so far this week, but there's still some new on defense, and that includes Patrick Queen, Payton Wilson being added to the linebacker room, while you wrote about Cole Holcomb, who is still working his way back from that really tough injury from last season. What is the early sense of just getting to talk to and getting the feel from how some of the new linebackers are adapting to the Steelers defense and fitting into the more put together side of the ball the Steelers have?
Yeah, Chris, it's kind of interesting. I guess this is really sort of the second year in a row that a lot of these inside linebackers have had to form relationships and figure out what it's like playing next to each other. I mean, we know this time last year it was a full rebuild. Devin Bush, Robert Spillane were gone. And the third guy that I'm forgetting about, Miles Jack, sorry. And then and last year, they brought in Elandon Roberts and Cole Holcomb to kind of be the new tandem. And eventually Quan Alexander joined that group too. So just when you thought you were going to have some stability at that spot for the Steelers, yeah, that Holcomb injury early November last year, I mean, basically puts him on the shelf indefinitely. And then you sign Patrick Queen, you draft Payton Wilson. So Roberts is sort of the glue to try to hold things together now. And he's a great glue to have as far as his mentality and his football character and leadership and everything like that. But Queen absolutely seems to be up to the task of, not just making plays on the field, which we've seen in the first week of OTAs. He had a pick six, whatever stock you want to put into plays that guys are making in, like you said, Chris, football and shorts. I'm going to kind of reserve judgment on a lot of that stuff until at least mandatory minicamp next month, maybe even training camp out in Latrobe in July. But, he's clearly picking up the defense early on. He's his locker's right next to Elandon Roberts and Payton Wilson. So all three of those guys are sort of getting to know each other as people as well as players. And yeah, Holcomb is the X factor. I did write about him today. It was kind of like pulling teeth to get him to talk much about his injury, which is understandable, but basically said he's confident he's going to play again. It's just been a grind. He's got to work his butt off to get back to the field. And I think, as much as I respect and appreciate his work ethic to do that, you got to be fairly, cautious if you're the Steelers about expecting too much from him if and when he does return. So I think if he gets back, great. Maybe you can minimize whoever's the least effective at that point. And if not, you've still got a pretty good big three there with the moves you made this offseason.
Yeah, I think it has a really interesting potential for the Steelers because you looked at what Quan Alexander brought to the table. You looked at what Elandon Roberts with Cole Holcomb. All three were decent linebackers who could kind of just be solid at their position. Patrick Queen is probably the next step down from guys like Fred Warner, Roquan Smith, who was his teammate last year, the guys who are definitely the best linebackers in the NFL. People aren't putting Patrick Queen in that category, but he might be like the step right below them guys. If there's, if you're kind of putting tiers on linebackers right now in the NFL, and having that guy in the middle part of your defense and not asking him to, be the best linebacker in football because you got TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Alex Highsmith, Joey Porter Jr. is playing really well. You got all these other elements to your defense. You're just like, hey, just, be solid here, be a strong player. And that could be the focus point there. And I think that the Steelers only asking that of him, I think will allow him to play more naturally into a role. And then at the same time, I also think that Payton Wilson, because he has Roberts and Queen ahead of him, that gives him time. Even if Holcomb isn't back for a few weeks into the season, it makes it so he doesn't have to be the guy. He can be like a dime backer or learn the offense learn the defense that way.
Yeah, I mean, somebody asked Elandon Roberts the other day what stands out to him about Payton Wilson, and he just looks over at him in his locker. He's like, he's really tall. So
he is the
dimension that he brings size-wise to this group. Even compared to Holcomb, I mean, Wilson's the most sort of physically impressive. We'll see if he puts on any weight, but you don't want to lose that speed that made him so effective in college at NC State. And yeah, I mean, we've seen the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah, it'd be great to be a team with the sort of Devin White, Levante David inside linebacker pairing, or Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw in San Francisco. But the Steelers, failing that, have been more about role allocation and, having your 3-down guy, having your early down guy, and then having your linebacker who's in there in the dime packages. Robert Spillane did that a lot on third downs and, obvious passing situations. So they've been pretty good about carving out roles for everybody. Last year it got thrown into flux more than anybody could have expected when you're running Michael Walker and Blake Martinez and, Miles Jack part 2 out there at the end of the season. So they've done another good job, I think, of trying to adjust on the fly to some curveballs at the linebacker position. And, Wilson falling to them was really beneficial, and we'll see. We'll track his progress here throughout OTAs, minicamp, and certainly training camp will be, even the best time to evaluate a lot of these guys, because you get the pads on, you do the inside run periods, and you see what guys are made of out in Latrobe.
Certainly, backs on backers, I think, has a lot of potential to be fun this year when you look at, who's there, who can play, and especially, with the running backs themselves. The Steelers want to be one of the most physical, or the most physical team in football. One of the ways to do that is testing that out one-on-one in those situations. Certainly, they have a lot going for them.
And I'm going to be so curious to see Patrick Queen in those environments. Like, with him being the number one guy and maybe the green dot and everything, I don't know how much the Steelers will want to see him sort of banging heads in those competitive one-on-one drills. But for when he is in there, that there's some a little bit of bad blood left over from the Steelers-Ravens rivalry. Like, he even acknowledged that this week. Like, I wasn't sure how some of these guys' attitudes were going to be, because you lock horns with them for the last 4 years. The juices are flowing. The adrenaline's going. So, like, let's be honest, you probably come to really dislike Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris to an extent, and now you're teammates with them. And I'm not suggesting by any means that they aren't getting along. I know they are, but it'll be a little bit of a blast from the past, I suppose, when he sees number 30 or number 22 across from him in those competitive periods.
Absolutely. We'll get to more on what's happening at OTAs. I want to talk about the cornerbacks next. Not just Joey Porter Jr., but it's the guys behind him who have a lot to prove in these OTAs and eventually training camp. We'll get to all that here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko. But first, we'll remind you, the show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, it's on the North Shore. It's right across the street from PNC Park on Federal Street. It's an amazing place. They have outdoor seating. They have indoor seating. They have 20 televisions if you want to catch up on all the sports. It's great for before, during, after Pirates games. It's great to just take in a beautiful night in the city of Pittsburgh. They have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap all day, every day. And you can go in and they're always switching switching different beers in and out on their taps, so that you always get a new experience every time you go there. They also have amazing food like their steak on a stone, where you get your choice cut of steak brought to you on a heated stone, and every time you cut up a piece, you just press it into the stone and you choose how well done you want every single bite. It's Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. Go there today. When you get there, tell them Chris sent you. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.